Hello, it's Scott Manley here, and this is a photo from a Boeing 737, which, according to some sources, may have hit space debris while in flight at 36,000 feet. Now, to be clear, the source of the statement that it's hit space debris seems to have come from a social media post, and right at the bottom it says this information is second-hand from a new hire classmate whose neighbour was a flight attendant for this flight. So we already know that this is already far from the source, but it does also state that the captain of this flight said he thought they hit a piece of metal space debris at flight level 360, which is about 36,000 feet. He said he saw it coming, no pressure loss, diverted to Salt Lake City, 3.5-inch diameter hole in the outer pane. So, yeah, this is the pane that has been damaged. You can see in the top left corner of it that it's a little brighter there because they've lost some glass on the outside. And actually, if we switch to some other images, this is the image on the outside, and you can see this section has been damaged. But you can also see some other damage that appears to have extended upwards and beyond the frame. So the Boeing 737 cockpit windows are 3 layers. There's one exterior layer of toughened glass, then there's a polymer layer in the middle, which is a bit more flexible. It doesn't shatter like the other layer. And then on the inside, there's another glass layer. So whatever hit this not only shattered the outer layer, but it caused the inner layer, or the middle layer, to flex with enough force that it caused the inner layer to shatter, and glass fragments were spalling all over the interior of the cockpit, and in fact appears to have caused some glass damages cut to the captain's arm. So this is quite a serious incident. What happened after that is that they declared, I don't know if they declared an emergency, but they decided to reroute to Salt Lake City. We actually have the map on this. But yeah, the NTSB is of course investigating. They have the hardware now being sent over to the NTSB, so they're going to be investigating that. They're going to look for any evidence, possibly some debris that has been incorporated into that, some that has been recovered. Like, for example, with bird strikes frequently leave blood and feathers, and these feathers are sometimes sent off to the Smithsonian, who will tell them the exact breed of which bird they hit so that they can, include that in the report. This is the report that is currently on the Aviation Safety Network page. There's not really any difference here. It just tells you that, they heard a noise and they saw the windows had been smashed. So just skipping over, we've got some other images here. This is another image from the inside. You can actually see some of the settings on the approach and everything here. Another shot from above. Notice that the filler here has been peeled away, and notice that you've also had this. Whatever hit here also hit this section, so it was wider than the damage to the glass that was made. One other thing to notice is this brown, reddish line at the top. I thought this might be some deposit that was left behind by the impact, but some people pointed out that it's actually very likely the electrical contact which connects to this windshield, because they have a heater element inside of that so that it doesn't fog up during flight. This is the actual map, and we can play back the event. So this happened around 6:40 a.m. And the thing you'll see when the emergency happens is the selected altitude on the flight management system drops from 36,000 to 30,000 feet. This is it here. It's headed this way. You'll notice that there's nothing really that is above it. So nothing could have dropped off. And Southwest Airlines is basically flying at the same altitude, but they're 50 miles away. So if this dropped a chunk of stuff, it wouldn't have any effect. Anyway, after descending, they further descend down to 26,000 feet, and then they turn north towards Salt Lake City. Now, they could have gone to other places, but Salt Lake City was the most obvious one, because it meant that if the middle windshield actually broke out and they lost cabin pressure, it would restrict their ability to climb up and get over the mountains in the area. So Salt Lake City was going to be the best option. If you learn as a private pilot, they tell you that 15,000 feet is the legal limit for carrying passengers. Above that, they have to get given oxygen, or they have to have it made available to them. So Airliners would probably be restricted to like 10,000 feet. And yeah, you can imagine that that would make it hard to get around some of these mountains. I also created the simulation in X-Plane using that flight data and basically showing what it would look like given the lighting conditions at that time. It was about 6:30 a.m. and the sun was getting ready to rise, but it hadn't really risen just yet. So you can see that outside it would be pretty dark. It would actually be very hard to see an object which wasn't illuminated or emitting its own light. So, does that mean it was space debris? Did the captain actually see something burning up outside? Well, we actually have a video of what space debris looks like. This is, from the European Space Agency. This is their ATV. It was a cargo spacecraft that went to the space station, and then afterwards it burned up. And so we have this nice footage of it burning up and breaking into all these little fragments. Now you might imagine that if one of these things, if a satellite burned up in the atmosphere, then it would come in and it would hit this aircraft and it could do a lot of damage, and the pilot might see this piece of burning debris coming in. And in fact, I've seen comments from various people saying, oh yeah, it looks like there's scorch marks, it looks like there's burn marks, this was definitely something coming from space. But I think a lot of people don't understand that when this thing splits up into debris, this debris slows down very, very quickly. And the pieces that make it down to the flight levels, down to like 36,000 feet, which is only like 10 kilometers up, by that point, they are not light anymore. They're not moving at hypersonic speeds. They're not emitting a lot of light. They tend to be dark. They tend to be cold. The same is true for meteorites, by the way. Meteorites that make it down that far tend to not be particularly hot anymore. In fact, it's quite common for a meteorite that lands on the ground to be cold on the outside and actually freezing on the inside. They'll land, they'll break, and then people will see ice forming on the interior of the meteorite. So the idea that you would have a high velocity piece of space debris come down and hit an airplane in flight is slightly different from the reality. So yeah, aircraft have been known to hit various things in flight. We've seen a lot of bird strikes. That's a very common thing. Obviously, that was responsible for the Korean airline crash last, December. But bird strikes tend to happen at lower altitudes because, they're down close to the ground. Birds do actually make it up into the flight levels. In fact, the highest altitude bird strike was at 37,000 feet over Africa, but I think that involved storm systems that were kind of producing thermals to lift the birds up to those high altitudes. I don't think that the highest one in the US is about 33,000. So I don't think this is a bird strike also because there's no blood and gore around this. So that's highly unlikely. Drone strikes sometimes happen as well. Those are becoming more common as people fly those things around the airports, but this is again up at 36,000 feet. Most small drones can't make it to that altitude. The large drones, they would make a lot bigger mess. So this is something that's clearly, only a few inches, 10, 20 centimeters across. Anything bigger, and it would make a bigger mark on it. And that does, narrow down the possibilities of things that it could be. So, could it be like hail? Well, we also see aircraft sometimes interacting with storm systems that generate hail that breaks windshields up at the flight levels, up at tens of thousands of feet, 30,000 feet or plus. That could be possible. I sort of took a cursory look at the weather, but I didn't see any it's hard to tell from the history as to whether there was any major storms in the area, but I'm not sure that would explain it either. So, so yeah, did it fall from space, right? Was there something up there that could have fallen from space? Well, the first thing is a lot of people see, Starship failing. They see the big trail over the Bahamas, and a lot of pilots were talking about that. So it's natural for a pilot having this to think, oh, it could well be a spaceship breaking up. Statistically, though, there's far more meteorites that fall down than satellites. There's hundreds of tons of meteorites that actually fall to Earth every day. Although they tend to be a lot of them tend to burn up at higher altitudes. There's only a few tons of satellites that are falling to Earth every day. Most of those are like Starlink at this point. And well, so yeah, if it was a chunk of meteorite, I'm not sure how you would have a chunk of meteorite this size that didn't. If you think about them as being a chunk of rock that was still operating, still contiguous, I don't know what would happen if it hit something like this. It kind of doesn't look like. It looks to me like there's something linear or something here that smashed into this thing, rather and something that didn't make a huge dent, something that was soft. So it might be. You might imagine like snow or a chunk of ice or something that broke up, not something hard like a piece of rock. That's why I'm like, meteorites? Yeah, probably not. I don't know about that. So space debris. Well, so space debris can come from a lot of things. It can come from rocket bodies. It can come from satellites. And just actually in the last 24 hours, we had a fairly substantial piece of space debris land in Australia. This was a composite overwrapped pressure vessel, a propellant tank, which has carbon fiber wrapped around it. This landed and it was still burning. This is quite substantial. So the large things, they can actually sort of remain hot all the way down. That carbon fiber was burning in the air. And this actually came from a Chinese rocket. But those are a lot rarer and they're tracked pretty well. Satellites, now, over the last decade, 20 years or so, people that build satellites have been trying to move them towards satellites that don't leave big chunks as they break up, right? They're trying to make the satellites safer so that when they produce debris, they don't end up smashing into the Earth. And this is called like demisable satellite design. So they have this nice graph right here, and they basically say, look, we made a simulated sphere out of aluminium and a simulated sphere of titanium, and the aluminium one demises to 100%, whereas the titanium, it actually never gets to the magic point where it melts and disintegrates. So titanium is more robust, and therefore you shouldn't use those in satellites because it could potentially make it to the ground. Other things they talk about is like a mass, a ballast, which needed to be made of tungsten. Well, they originally had it as a big solid block of tungsten, but that would make a big mess if it hit the ground. So what they did was they split it into lots of smaller parts, lots of plates, and then they wrapped that, I think, in aluminium, so that when that hit the atmosphere, that would burn up and the plates would all split into separate parts, and their terminal velocity would be low enough that when they hit the ground, they didn't release as much energy. And the target amount of energy that they're aiming for is 15 joules. And that's a number that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you. But, it's not that big. It's like dropping an apple from, some like 10 meters up. For reference, they say that 15 joules is roughly equivalent to a 1.7 inch hailstone. And yeah, joules are metric. 1.7 inches is about 4 centimeters, right? Pretty substantial hailstone. And that falling to the earth would create about, 15 joules of energy. So that is the target that they're aiming for. But actually, if you look at SpaceX are aiming for 3 joules with their Starlink designs. So they're really going at it. They're understanding that they are going to be dropping more satellites than anyone else. Therefore, they need to make sure their satellites are least likely to cause these effects. Okay, so that would, I guess, be an even smaller hailstone, right? So what would a 1.7 inch hailstone or an object with a similar mass do to an aircraft? I expect that it would do something like this. But it wouldn't actually be a 1.7, centimeter hailstone, inch hailstone, because it would actually be a more complex shape. It might actually be bigger. It might have slowed down a whole lot more. The whole point is the terminal velocity would be lower. But the other thing is that 15 joule number is based upon it free falling into the surface, right? Up at 36,000 feet, first of all, there's a lot less air up there, so it's still moving a bit faster, right? Its terminal velocity is higher, but also the airliner is moving at 400 knots, so that massively amplifies the amount of energy available. Therefore, yes, a well-designed satellite designed to demise, designed to produce small amounts of space debris, could produce an impact off this scale if they were exceptionally unlucky. And so, is it possible? Yes, but the other thing is that nobody has seen any fireballs or anything coming down. Nobody noticed a spacecraft burning up. If you remember this image here, it was pretty much night. Now, granted, it was just after 6 a.m., so, people may not have been up. People are more likely to see meteorites in the evening than they are in the morning because people stay up late. They don't get up early because, humans. There were no meteorite fireballs observed. These are the two that were observed on the 16th. They were both different by several hours, and they were more over on the east coast rather than in the middle of the country. So that's not it. Nobody saw any fireballs coming down. Nothing in the list of satellites that are being tracked would produce a satellite which would enter the atmosphere over this target site at that time. So it doesn't feel like a satellite, or if it is a satellite, it's not one that's being tracked. It could be some super secret military satellite which just decided to deorbit in exactly the wrong place. But given that nobody saw it, I'm skeptical. Now, another option that was laid out by a smart person on Twitter was to say, maybe it's somebody's weather balloon project. And that actually feels a lot more consistent with the potential reality. If you basically fill up a weather balloon with some helium, you attach a payload to it, which might only be a couple of kilograms. It's probably going to be wrapped in some like polystyrene, some foam to insulate it and keep it warm at the flight levels. This thing floats up, and you know what? It might actually go above these the flight levels, as we say, and then, since this has been at the end of the night, the temperatures have dropped. The balloon might have shrunk, and the balloons tend to sink down during the night, and so this might be at the low point in its flight before it's about to rise up again. Well, that could make something like this, and with a balloon attached, it would be a whole lot easier for the pilot to see something moving, and maybe not get an idea of what was moving, but also then see that this event happens and the thing smashes into it. And because it's lower density, it could cross this larger area. That is a possibility. That feels like a really good possibility, right? So now, weather balloons, if you're building ones that have payloads greater than about 6 pounds, you're supposed to inform the FAA, you're supposed to launch them from safe areas that aren't going to be near flight routes. You're supposed to create NOTAMs. Even for the smaller ones, which could be responsible for something like this, you're not required to, but it would really help if you did, because the air traffic control would know to move things around. Wouldn't it be great if these things carried beacons? Well, it turns out that people that fly these things would love to actually put ADSB like beacons on them, transponders, so that the aircraft could actually see them in their flight tracking hardware. But the FAA doesn't want things that aren't planes to be broadcasting ADSB because it would congest the frequencies. And I'm a little skeptical of that. I think that is a poor decision. There's a lot of people that would like to be broadcasting these things. I know people on hang gliders and ultralights who would love to legally be able to broadcast ADSB, and I think that is still not allowed. But if you've got something that's going to be up in the flight levels, it seems like something trivial to use this software, to use this capability, to use these transponders, which are already well integrated into the air traffic control system. That anybody can build a tracker. The aircraft have the trackers built on board. The frequency congestion thing, maybe they should use the 978 megahertz version, which isn't allowed up in the flight levels because it's not compatible with international standards, but it would certainly help, and it wouldn't congest the frequencies used by the airliner, so then you would have a little less congestion trouble going on. I don't know, this is a fascinating problem. What I'm really waiting for is to see what the NTSB sees. They're going to take a look at this. They're going to look at the forensic evidence. They might find something stuck in here that tells you exactly what it came from. And maybe they'll find a NOTAM or something. Maybe they'll find debris on the ground. But, if this had gone really badly, yeah, that window could have popped. The pilots would have had to immediately don the oxygen masks. They have these very simple one-hand don masks. They would have descended very, very rapidly to get down to surface altitudes. But it's just very unlikely to have a window break at this kind of altitudes. But, it does happen. We've had cases where engines have let go, and turbine blades have smashed into windows, and those have popped open. And that's not a good situation to be in. So yeah, I don't think it was a piece of space debris. I think there's other things that are far more likely, but I'm really waiting to hear what the NTSB says. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.